And then moving into the last part of the introduction, I have, should coded language be used to teach dominant groups about their own privilege? And to start, I begin by talking about Robin DiAngelo's article, White Fragility, where she discusses how angry and defensive white people tend to get when confronted with their own privilege. And she cites several instances of racial sensitivity trainings where she's been working, or white people claim they're being oppressed against because everyone is looking for diversity. And this is despite the fact that everyone who is employed there is white. There is still a white majority. Yeah, she kind of uses these examples to point out the irony in these statements. But anyway, it kind of brings up the idea that, like, when people are confronted with their privilege and power, they become uncomfortable with it and can get defensive and angry, which are usually barriers to being willing and able to change. So it kind of brings up the question, what is the best way to teach people about their privileges and power? Can people learn after being initially defensive and angry, and should their feelings be protected? And while I don't feel like white people or privileged people should be coddled or their feelings should be catered to, because quite honestly, they haven't really done anything to deserve that, I do feel like there needs to be a method of breaking through anger and defensiveness, because those two things lead to issues with unlearning. Anger is counterproductive, and so is defensiveness. And it makes people less open to transformation and willingness to unlearn. And while I'm not exactly sure the specifics of how coded language could be employed to kind of counteract this, I do feel like it's worth thinking about ways to go about being specific in language so it doesn't cause initial anger and defensiveness with dominant groups. And then this little blurb at the bottom is kind of an explanation about what the rest of the dictionary is. I'll just read it verbatim. It says, the rest of this dictionary is dedicated to specific instances of coded language discussed in this course, what the goal and meaning of each term or phrase is, and various methods for counteracting each one. And then after that, I went in alphabetical order, and I started with achievement gap. And if you can see here, I put the little noun thing, like seen in a dictionary, and then two different definitions for it. And the first one reads, defined by experts as being the disparity in academic performance between groups of students. And then the second, more accurate, more true description would be a phrase that is designed to place blame on the students rather than the system for failures in their educational achievements. And then to kind of go into more of the explanation of that, I wrote, the term achievement gap is a prime example of deficit language, which is a term used by Gloria Ladson-Billings in her article, Pushing Past the Achievement Gap, an essay on the language of deficit. Many other things are at play in terms of on-paper student success, wealth, institutional racism, biases in testing, etc. I discuss a lot about how standardized testing really only benefits one specific type of students, and how oftentimes those in marginalized groups are put at a disadvantage for standardized testing. And then I wrote, instead of using the term achievement gap, one should use education debt. This implies that these students are owed something by the educational system after hundreds of years of neglect and mistreatment, in this case referring to those students as those who have been put at a disadvantage. Then I wrote, when detecting coded language, phrases that actively present the minority group as the one who is causing the issue is a great way to be able to identify coded language. The next piece of coded language I chose to focus on were two words, centrism and neutrality. And to start, I have centrism as a noun. It's a political ideology focused on preserving a perfect balance between the right and left. And then I wrote, an ideal that cannot truly exist, typically someone who is right-leaning, attempting to give off the impression of neutrality. We discuss this a lot in class. And then neutrality I have as also being a noun.